Council Chair, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. This afternoon we are here to discuss a bit more in a bit more detail what we have completed during the morning session. We appreciate our distinguished guests from WIPO and GIPO and all of you for patiently waiting to join the afternoon session. Just a few remarks before I sit down. I remember in April this year, I think it was 24th or 25th, the WIPO World Intellectual Property Day, I joined a book launch at the Kofi Annan International Center. It was a book written by a certain lady and her co-authors. Title of the book is Monetizing Your Creativity. It's a very beautifully crafted book. It's set in the nature of an unanswered story. And I encourage everyone to get that book. I mean, in spite of all the legal terminologies and technicalities, these authors have been able to bring it so down. And for those of us who like unanswered stories, you cannot put it down. And it captures everything. And so at the launch, a few people were invited, and one of the invited guests was our own former Attorney General, Betty Mould Idrisu. I think at the point she was also Minister of Education. And when she mounted the stage to give her remarks, and I had been introduced, so I was sitting right in front there. And then she looked at me and said, "Hey, CSIR, I've been on you. When I was Attorney General, I was on you. When I became Minister of Education, to get this IP thing going, I hear that now you are taking baby steps." Everybody was laughing, but I wasn't too happy, though I smiled and, pretended that it was a very beautiful joke. Fortunately, today, the baby is beginning to take strides. And so this morning, we have launched, all of you, together with our partners, and our goal is to do further discussion. This is step one. Step two is to move it further and monetize our creativity and make sure that a lot more is obtained, and our scientists and innovators and inventors are motivated and challenged to do more. So on that note, I want to welcome you all back to the afternoon session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DG. At this juncture, may I ask our distinguished personalities on the high table to please move to the front row so we can all see the presentations which are going to be done. Thank you. Thank you very much. There's a slight change in the program. We were going to start with Professor Tom Ogada, but there's been a slight change, and so Mr. Samuel Anum will do the very first presentation for us. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Yep, to make this slight change because what Prof has is going to go into more details. So what I'm just going to do is just to give some kind of indication, and it's okay. And I've entitled it Issues for Consideration. As was said this morning, this is just the first step. And in the implementation stages, that's where we are really going to do the work. So I have, I think, a few slides just for us to go through. And then we'll see, give you an indication as to the kind of work that has to be done. So once you've launched the IP policy, and that was said, that is the first step and the easiest step. Now we have to get into the details. So once you have the policy, we should have a strategy and a plan in place with a budget. So we need to go into the policy. What's the strategy that we need to implement it? And in actual fact, having gotten the policy, the implementation, what it's rather going to bring out is for CSIR to have an IP management system in place. And it will constitute 5 stages. So the first stage is where you want to check on your potential IP that is being generated. So you need to have a pre-IP stage, and that is where you have, when you're beginning your research, you need to do searches to find out what is new and what is not new. So you have to incorporate this as part of your research activity. So the pre-IP stage is where you have an idea, you are tossing it around, you are trying to look for literature, etc. And one of the good databases is to, if it's involving technologies, is to look at the IP and the patent database. And out of, once you generate these ideas, you can have a kind of potential IP portfolio. And this is where you need to have guidelines on disclosures, etc., etc. And as part of the implementation of the IP policy, these guidelines will have to be developed and in consultation with the IP focal persons. Then once you have gotten some potential IP, now the next stage is the protection. And that is where now, if it's a patent, then you need to go through the drafting processes, etc. If you are dealing with a plant variety, whatever it is, you also have to put all of them in the form that you can then file. And it involves a lot of documentation. So don't be surprised when you have a lot of guidelines coming to you. But when you start from the beginning, it might look a bit wieldy, but as you get along, it will become simpler. Then once you go into the protection phase, it should lead you to whether you want to commercialize or not to commercialize. Now, after the post-IP stage, then we need to look at the commercialization issues. And that comes with its own activities. A lot of, you also have to have guidelines, valuation, etc. And not going to go into details with that. But this is just to give you the framework that you're going to go through. Then, in certain instances, you might have to acquire IP. That's for strategic issues, if there need be. Then once you have commercialized it, it becomes your right. Now, no one enforces your right for you. You need to enforce your right. So you should have a system where you can scan the market and then be able to identify persons who might be violating your IP rights. So these 5 stages are very big activities that we have to really draw a plan for. And all of these cannot be put in place within a year. So once we draw the plans, we'll exactly look at how many years it might take us to get into, to fully have a system in place. I don't want to mention any other thing that might frighten people. And the IP system thrives on documentation. So you need to have the required human resource in place, which will be trained, and then strong IT systems, and then an appropriate organizational structure to be able to deliver it. IP is a full-time activity, but once you begin, some persons might take it as some part-time. But going forward, you have to develop career lines for the IP personnel. Other than that, we will not be able to achieve any activity. So we will also be engaging with the HR department to see how best you can put a career path for those who will take that full-time activity, and also the kind of systems that you want to put in place so that it will make the administration easier for you. Now, prior to, once you, that's just the framework for you. Now, for you to undertake any IP activity, the first thing you need to do is to undertake an IP audit. And that is what Prof is going to speak in detail with other issues. So the IP audit is supposed to enable you identify your potential IP assets, and those may be that you could have protected and I lost. What can you do with that, etc., etc., etc. It's also an elaborate system that we need to go through. And so first, with the IP audit, you have the internal one. That's what I've mentioned. And also, when you have competitors, you also want to see what they also have. So it's both internal and external. But most often than not, what you have control on is the internal process, and it goes through several processes. So, for example, for the CSIR, where you have 13 institutions, yes, each institution will have to undertake its own IP audit. And I think the first step we need to take is to do some kind of training with the IP focal persons. And I believe that each institute will also have to have its IP team, and then we'll go through some kind of training. Then that IP audit can be done. It does not mean that we need to complete everything before we start putting the system in place. CSIR is already a going concern. Persons are involved in research activity. So the first point of call is to engage with the researchers to find out what exactly they are doing, and then to see which ones you can immediately start correcting and maybe getting more information such that you could steer the research in a certain manner where you can have IP rights. So I'm not going to speak much, and I want to end here for Prof to take over to do the detailed activity. So this is just a primer for you. All right.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there are a few questions people would like to ask, but we'll have a special Q&A session after Professor Tom Ogada's presentation.
I was slightly nervous immediately after lunch when I saw just a few people had come back. And I was telling myself, wow, did I need to come all the way from Nairobi to talk to only 5 people? And I'd warned her yesterday, but one, when she insisted that I will talk for 15 minutes. Again, I said, no, I can't come all the way from Nairobi to talk for only 15 minutes because I'm coming to talk to researchers, and I want to provoke them as much as possible so that by the time I leave here, I will also feel good with myself that at least I've provoked you and perhaps added value. And this is why I've intentionally also decided to change the title. By the way, I've changed the title this morning. And I was inspired by the guest of honor, the minister, when in his speech he mentioned commercialization almost 5 times. And I was saying, yes, I'm in the right place. I think the theme, what we should be discussing, is commercialization. And I thought that I should be able to do 2 things. One is that to share some of the experiences that we are currently, various projects that we are undertaking, all focusing on commercialization. But two, the fact that we have today launched the policy. I wanted us to turn everything down, upside down, to the extent that we say that it is not the policy that we need, it is the commercialization that we are driving to achieve, but we want to use policy to help us to do what? To achieve that. Because in the final analysis, and you'll be seeing from this presentation, is that until it is commercialized, everything else has no meaning, has no value. And that is the structure that this presentation, I've taken for this presentation. So I want just very briefly take us through the path of development of intellectual property policies in Africa, not this one, so that you can also be able to see the changes that have been going on, and with that slowly also start appreciating why today nobody can talk about IP policy without talking about commercialization, and why that commercialization is very, very central in everything that we want to discuss around intellectual property, and then briefly some of what we see as strengths, what is currently today obtaining, and what really should be obtaining with respect to management of intellectual property assets. Just a moment, and thereafter we'll come back to what Sam was talking about, the idea of having a commercialization strategy. And finally, I know you have an office already, but there are quite a lot of challenges, not here, but everywhere else in the continent. So again, we want to discuss with you some of the things that are coming up around management of intellectual property offices and technology transfer offices, and how best then this can be managed, can be pushed forward, going forward. So briefly, this process of intellectual property is more than 20 years in this continent. I started the process in Kenya around 1998 through the support of WIPO then. We got very excited amongst the university. In fact, there is a project that we did in almost 5 African countries, including Ghana. And we realized that there was need to support universities, in even universities and research organizations in even better understanding the whole idea of intellectual property policies and how to do it. And because of that, then we managed to come up with a guideline, the first guideline for WIPO on how this could be done, focusing on African universities and research institutions. And through that, we came up with a few IP policies in various universities. My university then was the first in the Eastern African region. We had our first one, 2004, and then several other universities also came up to the extent that around 2010, we had already a series of IP policies, what we called the first generation. This first generation focused mainly on 2 things. Who will own it between the researcher and the university? And what was the need for the researchers and the various stakeholders in the event of commercialization? I want to tell you a joke around that. It took me 3 years to have the policy approved within the university. And it took us as a committee 2 years to agree on that aspect of benefit sharing. The sad news, of course, eventually we agreed and we had a very nice formula. The sad news that what took 2 years to negotiate 10 years down the line, there was no researcher that had benefited from that benefit sharing. You want to tell me why? And why was that? Why was it? There was nothing to share. We spent 2 years discussing about revenue sharing. But 10 years down the line, with a very good benefit sharing, there was nothing to share because commercialization had not taken place. The focus then was that you have a policy to be ticked. We now have a policy. Then the second thing would be how many IP applications. In fact, IP applications became so popular that eventually it was included as one of the indicators for ranking universities and research organizations. And the first generation delivered that. But no success was realized because that incentives that needed to go to the researchers in order for more IP to be generated was not there because there was no money. And instead, therefore, researchers said that we know what will benefit us, and what will benefit us is publication. That one is clear, because you publish, you are likely to be promoted to the next level. The third thing was that there were policies, yes, but they were never implemented. In fact, the last assignment I did at the university, my university, which was very demoralizing, was just to do a simple audit of how many of the researchers knew that the university had an intellectual property policy. And the number was below 40%. And I said, wow, what is all this? We had a policy which was never implemented. That motivated the coming up of the second generation of intellectual property policies. This second generation, the uniqueness about them was first, those who had the first generation were now revising. And they needed to do things differently from the way they had done it before. And two is therefore that they needed data, they needed evidence, and therefore they started with the audit. How are we doing our things now? Where are we succeeding? Where are the gaps? And what can, therefore, the policy be used to address those gaps? And more importantly, they quickly realized that IP application was not equal to IP grants. The numbers in terms of applications were very good. The numbers in terms of what was actually granted was very low. And yet, commercialization is pegged on grants. So again, something that was not adding up. And therefore, that there also came in the second generation with the idea that you needed to push them to push the applications beyond just application to grants. And of course, I mentioned the idea that there was need to focus on commercialization. I mentioned the idea that there was need to ensure that the IP policies are implemented, and therefore you needed to have in place an implementation plan. We are now doing the third generation. And the third generation of IP, we are saying loudly, we focus on commercialization. And commercialization must be done with a very, very clear roadmap through what Sam was saying, having in place an IP commercialization strategy or a master plan. So that is the first thing that I thought I wanted to mention. But I wanted to come back and persuade you that commercialization, which is the third step in the IP cycle, because you start with generation, you go to protection, then you go to commercialization. That commercialization should be the most important thing, so that whatever strategy we are doing around IP management within the institutions should be driven by commercialization. The first is that if you look at all our visions and missions, we do research because we want to impact positively to national economic development. That positive impact to national economic development, you cannot be able to realize it until there is the outputs of R&D are actually utilized outside there. So it means until commercialization is actually has taken place and a product has been removed from the institution to the society outside there. Because today it is expected of us that whereas publication is good, and we need to continue with the publications, but the society expects that what we are doing in terms of R&D should actually be able to address problems that we are facing as countries. Problems of hunger, problems of disease, problems of industrialization, big loss of post-harvest losses, problems of creating employment opportunities for the youth. And the only issue is how do you use research for this? You can only do that if it is commercialized. Through commercialization for institutions like yours, again, now you can directly contribute to the economic development. And you can be able to document and make noise about it. When it is known by the youth outside there, the women group, that look, this entity that we are currently having that is bringing us income is actually the work of CSIR, then even the relevancy of the organization and the public image and perception of the organization will increase. And with that, for universities, they will be realizing their third mandate. For research institutions, you will be realizing your second mandate of extension services and things like that. And eventually, God willing, you could be able to generate some money. But for the researchers, it is critical because until commercialization takes place, you have no business talking about benefit sharing because there will be nothing to share. Fortunately, today, there are also countries that have started recognizing, apart from publications, issues of applications for intellectual property, grants, and commercialization for the purpose of promotion. So both ways, then the researchers can be able to gain. Quite a lot of commercializations are taking place, by the way, and which is very positive. And what we want to see, again, very briefly, are what is it are we doing and where are the gaps? What do we need to improve on? Of course, we know there are various methods of commercializing through self-exploitation, by selling outrightly to anybody who cares to take it and exploit, through licensing and through joint venture. Now, this first one is the most popular one and widespread in most universities and research organizations in this country. Not in this country, but in this continent, which is already positive that at least something is happening within our institutions. The R&D outputs are being packaged and processed and made available, and through that, therefore, some income generation is taking place, and of course, products are sold. Unfortunately, what is happening at the departmental level, done at a very, very small scale, that cannot have the impact that is desired in the economy. We have very few cases of spin-offs, and yet it is expected of us that through R&D we can be able to create industries that will become local industries that can now link again back with the universities and research institutions and create employment opportunities and revenue for the countries. Commercialization, as I indicated, takes place in various departments, but not well coordinated. And even where they are somehow coordinated, not well documented, and therefore lack of publicity of what actually institutions are doing to use R&D to impact positively on economic development is rarely articulated. This is a component which is today not very popular within Africa, where you find intellectual property being sold. And I think it is because perhaps the industry outside there waits to see something which is working. So which means that there is need for some initial money to be injected to operationalize an intellectual property asset, make it make business, and then have a history that you can be able to present to a potential buyer for sale of intellectual property. The same thing with the joint venture, which traditionally would be perceived to be a very, very strong way of collaboration. Because here, then, as a research organization, you will bring the know-how and technology that you have, but the investor would bring in money for investment and business skills, marketing skills, and things like that. Again, it is an area which has a huge potential, but very, very few cases in Africa that you can count on. Again, an area that you may want to exploit as a way of commercializing your R&D outputs. Traditionally, licensing is the most popular, both in Africa but also outside, and quite a number of licensing cases we have had, and some have been very successful, which is really very, very positive. And again, we see this as opportunity of that all of us can be able to take as institutions to help us push the commercialization agenda. And we have some very interesting case studies that I was personally involved in, which if we will want to discuss more about it is something that we could be able to explore. But I wanted to mention, just as a summary around the few slides that I've shown, that we are currently pushing to rethink about the funding mechanisms that we do towards research. Because what is outside there is that the researchers are stranded. You'll put money in research, you come up with very good products, you have done your publication, but you lack money to move the product to the next level. And this is why in one project I'm involved in, we are currently trying to persuade university senior management that when you are funding research, please allocate at least 30% of research funds to go towards taking research outputs to the next level, because that process is required to unlock even the investment by the private sector in anything that will have come up, including spin-offs. So this therefore then brings me to the issue of having a master plan. And a master plan here, we are thinking that would help us coordinate and fill all the various gaps that are there in terms of commercialization activities that we are undertaking in order to make commercialization drive not only the research agenda, by the way, we want even to go that extent, that commercialization should drive the research agenda, but also drive the management of intellectual property assets within our organization. This, therefore, will require the steps that I've just listed there. The first one is what Uncle Sam was talking about, getting to know what is it do you have. But more importantly, and I need to stress this, what is it you should be having but you don't have? Because we realized that the potential in a research organization like yours to lose intellectual property assets is significantly high. That in most cases, when you compare what you have filed for protection and what you could have filed if you had sealed all the loopholes, what you have filed accounts for between 10 to 15%. 80% is lost. And that 80% is the potential technologies, the potential innovation that you need to have harnessed by sealing specific loopholes. So you start with that audit, and that audit should be able to provide you with that opportunity. Once you know what you have and what you should be having and the challenges that you have with respect to management of intellectual property, then now you ask yourself, but how much is it that these assets I'm having are worth? So that even if now we were to ask the DG or the chair that we put money, the chair will want to know what is the potential return on this investment if you put money in it. So again, knowing, determining the value of some of these assets that you'll have identified is also important. And unfortunately, there are methodologies for that. And after that, then you decide on how do we commercialize it. And how do we commercialize it becomes a strategic issue of the organization, because then the organization will want to use that route of commercialization that will bring maximum benefits to the three key stakeholders: the government through National Development Agenda, the institutions based on the things that I've articulated, and you, the researchers. That, again, something that needs to be articulated in the commercialization strategy or master plan. And then you look at what type of structure do I need to put in place in order to drive this agenda. And that then, of course, we'll be talking about the fact that you have already an IP office, you have technology transfer office, you have also some commercialization and pilot projects that are going on. You want to see how best can all this be coordinated. Today, three key issues that are being discussed with respect to establishing and managing technology transfer offices. The first one is, where do you locate it? And I'll tell you, by the way, it's a major challenge. Perhaps even in Ghana, we'll ask Uncle Sam, because he did the audit for the universities. You'll find in one university or research organization, it is under the DG or Vice Chancellor. In another one, it is under Corporate Affairs. In another one, it is under Students Affairs. In another one, it is under Research and Development Director. So, and in some cases, the offices is moved from one place to another place to another place. And a clear indication that either people do not understand the importance of these offices, or it is one of those subsidiary offices that is nice to have, but not strategic. And today, we are requesting that that is one office that its location must be strategically thought of to give it that preeminency that it requires in order to mobilize not only the generation and protection of intellectual property, but also commercialization. So that is one. Number two is, what type of people do we need to have in that office? What type of qualification do they need to have in order to effectively run that office? And where can this qualification be obtained? What is the role of the researchers? Can researchers become effective technology transfer managers? And if you remember, even what the minister was saying in the morning, it's part of the debate. How do we ensure that technology transfer offices effectively function? Because they are there, widespread in Africa, but when you look at the deliverable, it is not there. Because they have not been well placed, they have not been well resourced, they have not been well supported, but more importantly, I proudly go around saying that I established the first technology transfer office, which failed. And therefore today I can talk about how not to establish a technology transfer office. The office must have a very clear mission, and you must do soul searching. Why do we need this office? Is it income generation? Or is it a unit that will support you to realize your R&D mission for the country? And if you can be able, at higher level, chair and DG, do that, then that office will succeed. If that is not clearly articulated and defined, expectation will go up and yours will fail just like mine did. So the mandate, and by the way, we are just preparing currently a guidebook on how to establish and manage a technology transfer office, including the type of personnel that needs to be there, including the mandate and how to balance between the mission of generating knowledge for economic development of the country and the desire to generate income to supplement the government efforts. By the way, the two are important, but then they need to be balanced. The third one, which is the last one, is that, and he mentioned about it, there is lack of clear career progression guideline for technology transfer managers. And therefore, you find anybody picked, somebody will be there, 10 years down the line, they are still there, and they have not moved up because there is no career progression guideline. So what would motivate, therefore, somebody to work? And we agreed, it was mentioned, that there must be people there who are working there in that office full-time. Although we are also recommending in our guideline that you need also to have a senior researcher or a senior lecturer in the role of a director that provides the link between the technology transfer office and the senior management. In university, for instance, we are saying, if you want to influence and create adequate awareness, then the technology transfer office must be represented in Senate. But the technology transfer manager may not have the qualification to sit in the Senate. And that's why we are saying that have technicals to do the technicals, but also appoint a director that will be having two roles, both technical and political. And political here, because every institution has politics. Political here means that somebody who is recognized that if he stands in Senate or in management of research organization, management up there, and talks about technology transfer, people want to listen. Because that bridge at this level of development of our institutions is required. I will stop there I just thought I could be able to mention a few of these because I know that you are determined to implement this policy. The policy has prioritized commercialization, no doubt. It is somewhere between the third and the second generation. What is now lacking in this, the policy is what we call the implementation implementation plan and commercialization master plan and strategy, and that some of these are things that you will be confronted with, and I thought it was just better that I mentioned them. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
I didn't time you.
I could have continued.
Thank you very much, Professor Tom Ogada. At this point, would like to take some questions. As I indicated earlier, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So any questions for Professor Tom Ogada now? Uncle Sam.
Okay. Prof, thank you very much for this incisive talk. It's an area that the prominence to which we want to give to it has made us to launch this policy. I look at two sides to that in terms of the university and then CSIR, of course, the country in totality. I remember there was one time I went for a conference in Germany. I had something which I thought was very, very important. That at that time, something just kicked in me that I should have a patent to this. I had just gone there for just a week for a conference, and then there was a patent office. You know, the Germans they came to be part of the conference. So I engaged with them. They said, yeah, this is fine. You can start the process. And you know what stopped me? The fee. And I've been in the University of Ghana, and I see that it is one thing that stops a lot of people. It's so expensive to have a copyright or intellectual property or patent for something. So that is one area that we should be able to look at. People may have workable ideas that are original, not novel, but original, which they are putting together. Then they come to the full stop of is the Ghana system able to support us to be able to have this looked at? Sometimes in the universities, because there's no money, we will directly, sometimes we're part of the administrators, we will directly just be dogging you up and down with certain technicalities that we have not reached there to be able to get our support. Because they don't have the money. And they cannot tell you straight that we don't have the money. So they will tell you that, oh, have you done this aspect? Have you done this? More to this. Meanwhile, had it been in some other country, you have not gotten to the last stop. But there's a certain part of technology that have developed that must be made and protected, and people should move from there on. So finance is something that I think that we are not talking about it in your talk. Finance is an important component. The other thing that I have in my mind is when you look at, there's some, the commercialization aspect, we all look at it, we want to gain from it, make money out of it. Now, being a physical chemist, I look at certain things that you come out with, that at that point in time, there's no commercial aspect, commercial potential you can see. And we all see that with Nobel things that come 50 years later on becomes a money guzzling something or money yielding something. But at that time, it was just a pure theoretical framework that some people have built upon to be able to make money. And in such instances, without that commercial potential being very clear that you are going to make money from this, do you support it or you don't support it? because not all of them actually gives you the dollar blinking light that you're gonna get it when you develop it. It comes out later, years after. Thank you.
Would you like to, Uncle Sam?
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Talking about costs, there's nothing like, how do I put it, a global protection. So usually, in your research, first thing is to look at what the market will look like. And then the markets that you can protect. It's not all markets. You look at the markets that have got value. So if there's one particular market giving you, say, a few hundred thousands, you decide not to protect it, but you go and protect it where the billions will come from. From the start, you should have an idea as to the markets that you want to get in. So that gives you that particular. Now, the key thing, if it comes to patents, is the drafting. But we are seeking to go around this. That's why Prof did mention that we need persons who will be dedicated. Currently, Ghana is signed onto a WIPO scheme where you develop what is known as the Technology Innovation Support Centers. And these will be in the IP offices. Now, what is this office going to do? It's rather going to support the IP system, then through to commercialization. So even to the CSR, we've written to the requesting for 2 persons such that these are people, and not to only the CSR, but to I think some 9 or 11 institutions, such that they should provide us with these persons because we want to roll this activity on. Now, these persons will be trained and will be certified. Now, one of the things that is going to be done is that they will be taught how to do patent searches, which they will use to support the researchers. So they will be full-time. And then the next stage is to also assist and to train them to do drafting of patents. So this will cut down the cost of drafting drastically. And even one thing that I've done recently was I got a request from the University of Cape Coast, one researcher, and he came out with a draft that I didn't have much time to look at it. But he came out with kind of patent draft. We looked at the laws, some didn't fit, so I gave a guideline, and he's done the draft. I filed it in the Ghanaian office. That's the first point, and then within 12 months, we'll see whether he can look at the African market. So there are ways to go around these things. If you go through the normal route, you might not be able to pay. But we want to develop capacity at the institutional level. It might not be perfect at the beginning, but it will cut down the cost. Now, the issue about research that is not commercial or might not be commercially viable. Yes, that's why we mentioned the strategy. Now, there are certain researches that will come out. They might not be commercially viable, but once you file and get that patent, it goes to elevate your institution. Now, if other potential investors are looking across, they will stumble on that and said, okay, this institution at least did this. They will be looking at other filings that you might have done. So all depends on the strategy. It's not always that it's going to be commercially viable, but some just to give you visibility in that particular area. So there's no one size fits all to do this thing. Prof. Have answered all of this? Okay, right.
I would like to add value to to the first question, which I think is really a big challenge. And I would like to say like this. Would like to see interventions at 3 levels. The first intervention is at government level. How does government fund R&D? And we want to influence that so that it changes. We are saying, for instance, funding of universities that have been pegged on number of students admitted and graduated and things like that should now be expanded to also include aspect of commercialization. People should be asked, we'll fund you so much if you are going to generate so many IP applications, so many grants, or so many commercialized products. So that funding system needs to be relooked at. At the same level, we would like to intervene at funding of research, not just higher education. And insist, by the way, it is a movement, and I hope, George, you will support us also on this through your other CAPs, that traditionally funding agencies of R&D have been funding research. And you'll write a nice proposal, indicate we'll do this project, we'll produce so many number of publications, and do this report, both technical, and after that, of course, the donor will be happy. Would want to see a situation now where deliberate efforts are being made to indicate so much will go towards funding what we call innovation, and specifically moving R&D outputs to the market. And so much would then now go towards funding research that will lead later to products. And we want to insist that that 30% be linked to the national priority sectors that have been identified by the government for that particular period. So that, I don't know now which development plan you are implementing, but definitely you have identified priorities sectors, whether you are talking about agriculture, manufacturing, and things like that, youth employment. And you want to therefore say that we'll want to put money in this direction, specifically to take existing R&D outputs within our research organizations to the market. That's still at national level. At institutional level, allow me to digress a bit. Recently, I was talking to, we have in East Africa, Inter-University Council of East Africa. And I said, if I were a vice chancellor and I have some money to fund research, I will stop funding research for at least 2 or 3 years and just focus on funding uptake of the existing products that the researchers have generated. So again, within the policy that we are making, we are requesting university management, and now I'm glad I'm talking to you, that we should now slowly make deliberate efforts to balance between, if I have $100 to fund research, 70–80%, let it go towards the research, but at least 20% should go towards now funding the uptake. And that should include a small fund for IP called IP Fund, specifically to support researchers who want to protect their research. At the third level is the level of researchers. Our researchers are very talented, and they are mobilizing resources. We all know that R&D funding in African universities and research organizations are 60 to 70 donor funded, which means these researchers are attracting funding. We are today persuading researchers. When you are doing your proposals, have a budget line indicating, just like you list workshops, conferences, travel, a budget line for IP protection for any products that may come out. And if possible, another budget line, piloting and testing of the products for the purpose of commercialization. And if we could all then, by the way, I said that my role today is to provoke you, so don't take offense. If we were today to start moving in that direction, that we take those strategies at national level, institutional level, and at individual researchers level, then collectively we can be able to start creating a dynamism that will enhance commercialization in our institutions.
Thank you very much, Prof. and Mr. Anu, for your answers. Let me start from a very minor point, and that has to do with when you started, and the topic was commercialization for enhanced IPR management in the CSIR. I turned it around and I said, enhanced IPR management for commercialization in the CSIR. And that helped me follow through your presentation and got me to be asking these questions. In fact, I will limit myself to only two. The first has to do with the question of how you can succeed as somebody managing the technology transfer office to manage the intellectual property of the various divisions or departments or institutes within the university or the research institution. And so when you talked about you being able to set up the technology transfer office in your university, I thought maybe you can share some experiences with me and then I'll learn. So that's the first thing. The second has to do with the intellectual property system generally. And if you take the case of patents, you've secured your patents, you have been able to get it granted in your countries of designation. You still need to do your monitoring to ensure compliance. And where there are infringements, the onus is on you to bring up the cases of infringement and fight it. And so you realize that it's not just an issue of just having funding to patents or to secure your intellectual property. It also has to do with the financial resources to do your monitoring. I would want your comments on that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, like I did indicate, you look at where your prime markets are. And there are certain times, I remember one instance was a case of HIV drugs for Ghana, where Ghana invoked the clause for compulsory license, which meant that Ghana could have that produced, and we would then pay the owner of the rights. Now they made an assessment and said the Ghanaian market was too small, so it came free to Ghana. So it's not all infringements that you would want to attack. You look at the market size. How is it? What is the dent that might have cost you? So it's not every infringement that you go after. It has to, does it make commercial sense, etc. So there are some markets that you would seek for protection, but it's just for strategic purposes. So unless we have a specific case to deal with, then we can look at the issues. But usually, you want to engage a legal firm and it can be quite expensive. So you need to look at what you are losing, and then do your what you call your net present value issues, and then you decide to pursue. So it's not a case that you want to go after. That's what I can say for now.
Prof, allow me to explain a bit. It is true I started the technology transfer office that later collapsed. And this office was started 2003, just 1 year before we launched the IPO policy. At that time, just 3 years before, the government had come up with a policy that indicated that much of the government funding for the education sector would go to basic education, and that tertiary institutions needed to find ways of generating income to supplement the government's efforts. So we started two major programs. The first program was called Parallel Degree Program, which was mainly to open up for those students who could sponsor themselves to access university education, apart from those that were sponsored by the government. So therefore, in the university at that time, you could get two types of students, all but in the same class, others sponsored by the government and others self-sponsored. So that was one income generation stream. The second income generation stream that we had was how to generate income based on the knowledge that is available within the universities. So who are talking about technology transfer, who are talking about consultancies, who are talking about making available laboratories for SMEs to come and use and pay. And we realized that those activities needed to be coordinated in a commercially oriented manner. And we thought that a technology transfer office would do that. In fact, in my university, we even went ahead and said that technology transfer office was not good enough because it would be like a unit of the university. So we established a company called More University Holdings Limited, which was company limited by guarantee, so 100% owned by the university. And the mandate was to generate money. And 5 years down the line, we did not generate adequate money to get recognition. And the governing council of the university said that no, this entity was a drain to the university than bringing in money. So it was closed. Two things happened 5 years later. One is that it was reestablished because the university realized that they were now losing on the other very, very important aspect, and that is the third mission of the university, which is to make knowledge available for development. But two is that before it was closed, it acquired a government-owned company, which was collapsing, a textile company. And today, the university is proud to be the only university in the region which is having a fully fledged textile company called Rivertex, fully owned by the university. And by the way, interestingly enough, the university is the second leading in terms of IP application in the country, because the bulk of them are coming from this company. So I just thought I should be able to mention it backs up what I was saying earlier, that the mission why you are establishing it must be very clear. Income generation is important, and definitely it will come. And note I'm using the word, it will come. Patience is required, Chairman, to support technology transfer office until that level that you feel they can be on their own. The benefit is enormous, but might not be seen by many people who are just looking at the technology transfer office from the financial lens.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay, thank you very much. My concern is about how long the intellectual property will last. What I know is it varies from one country to another country. And in some other jurisdictions, even within the provinces, within the same country, we still have a variation. And that's my concern. I haven't taken a look at the policy yet, but if you can clarify a bit on that. Thank you.
Well, I think that was the case some time back. But currently, most legislations across the globe are using the minimum standards from the TRIPS agreement, the trade aspects of intellectual property. So that sets the minimum standards for IP protection. So now there's more of convergence. So for example, for patents, it's 20 years. But that is on paper. It states that 20 years, but you need to renew it annually. Now, it also, although it says 20 years, it also depends on the industry in which you find yourself in. So, for example, if it's electronics, within 2 years, that has become obsolete. So, although it says 20 years, commercially, will you hold something that is not commercially viable for 20 years? Then when you come to trademarks, it's 10 years, but you can renew it endlessly. But there's a condition there. It should not become a household name. So if your trademark becomes, for example, I think sometimes, you know, you have this photocopying machine, and which was known as Xerox. Some time ago, yes, Xerox nearly became synonymous to photocopy, and they had to fight it back. If they didn't fight it back, it would have lost that trademark. But you can continuously, renew it every 10 years. Then when you come to industrial designs, our regime here used to have it for 15 years. Now, with the new act that we have, it's for 25 years. For geographical indications, as long as you keep the quality of the product is endless. So currently, you won't have, I don't know which jurisdiction is practicing that, but if they are members of the WTO and they've signed on to the TRIPS agreement, they have to, I think, that making your laws compliant with TRIPS, I think, began somewhere in the early 2000s. So currently, you should not have, I can't vouch for every country, but most countries have gone for the TRIPS minimum standards. So you won't find that variation. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. And I think I would call on Professor Bosu to give us. You want? Okay.
I just wanted to say something that really today's discussion is at high level, but you'll still need technical capacity building for you to be able to do what the policy expects you to do. And I think within the framework of the implementation plan that we had come up with within the IP policy We'll still be very delighted to conduct an online training for you, particularly on IP audit, on IP evaluation, on licensing, on patent drafting, so that then slowly your capacity would be enhanced, and Chair will be working very, very closely with the team that you have put in place to see that your capacity built to the extent that you can be able to deliver on the big mandate that has been bestowed on you. Thank you.
Any final words, Uncle Sam?
Thank you. So this is extra something that I just came to my mind. So we're looking at effective IPO office being run. We are running them with, excuse me to say, staff, human beings. They should be motivated. Now, that office, and we those who are on the field as technical people who come out with the technological ideas that needs to be patented, copyrighted, whatever. To have a very effective implementation, we need to have a very good discussion on such people who are running this, both in the office and on the field, how we are to motivate them. If I come with an idea, how much do I get personally, even though I'm working with the organization?
Yeah, Prof. Yes. Currently, you have we should have IP focal persons at all the research institutions, and they will be the eyes and ears of the IP central IP office. Now, the IP focal persons certainly are heads of divisions, etc. So we will not be doing the day-to-day activity of IP, and they will need to have some support staff. So you might have to look within the institutions, those who looking at the potential that they have can do that job. So they then will be liaising as part of their activity, as part of their activities, will be liaising with the various researchers. So earlier on, I did indicate that we need to produce guidelines, etc. So the first point of call is, if you're starting a research work, first thing is to have some, apart from going through your journal articles, one thing is to have a patent search done for you. And then that back and forth with the researcher, you could put out a proper proposal, and then the next steps will go on. So the work will be done at the institutes, and it means that we need to have a strong team there, and they are the ones that would be carrying out the IP awareness, etc., in the institution. The researchers will concentrate on the work that they need to do. So there has to be some kind of mindset. And this is what Prof did indicate, that yes, we'll need to do capacity building, but it gets to a point where it will be much more specialized. But for general capacity building, for persons to know what IP rights are, what they need to do, that will be done generally. Now for the particular group that is really have specific activities to carry out, then they will be given further training so that they will be able to do the work that they need to do. So essentially, this is the broad framework that we have, and they will work the details. Because when we come to the specialized training, it will differ from institution to institution. So for example, if you're taking an institution that is dealing with plant breeding, they will focus more on the plant varieties side. As against, certainly they might have some technologies and that we can look at patents. But we have general training for everyone. So that's it. Yes.
Plant breeding. I'm at PGRI, and I brought up some idea of plant breeding, which brings, if patented, maybe brings about $1 million to CSIR. And I've been supported by the Director General and the CSIR and everybody to be able to do this. Personally, how much, what percentage, let me just be very blunt, of this $1 million come to me? Thank you.
I've not looked at although we worked on this policy for some time, but within it, there's a sharing formula that shows where it goes to the percentage, etc., etc. So sharing formula is within there. So that is it.
By the way, let me say that the distribution is there, which was done by your team themselves. And it is very generous to the extent that the inventor, the researcher will be entitled, even after leaving this organization, if there is still revenue streaming in, then that percentage which the inventor, the researcher, was supposed to get will still be there. He will still be getting, he or she will still be getting it. So it is very well articulated in the policy also. Yeah.
Any other question or contribution? Okay, so I'll call on Professor Paul Bosu to give the closing remarks.
Thank you, Benedicta. You will notice that on the program it says that I have to give a presentation, but I'm not giving a presentation. Thankfully, I didn't even prepare a PowerPoint presentation because I didn't want to pretend to know and understand these IP issues when the experts are here. And so I comfortably yield to everything that they have said. I'll just make a few remarks, and Benedicta has asked me to then wrap up. So I have taken notice, and I'm speaking on behalf of management and all of us, of all the insights you have given us from Uncle Sam talking about the strategy that we need to put in place, the very important points about the statement that IP thrives on documentation. It's very, very well taken. It's a full-time activity, so we've taken very good note of that. And the fact that we need to develop career lines for staff and build a system. It's something that we really, and everything, we are definitely going to collect the slides. And of course, we are not going to let you off the hook. I mean, this is the beginning. So you can't bring us to this stage, and Loretta is there. You can't bring us to this stage and leave us hanging. Now we have to cling to you so that we can develop very well. And Prof. Ogada, I share with you that your story about spending, was it 3 years to develop the benefit sharing mechanism and not sharing anything? I tell you, you are not alone. You know, here in Ghana, in CSIR, we have a commercialization policy of a sort that has very elaborate sharing mechanism. Sometimes, maybe a few institutes every now and then, they share something or pretend to share something according to the mechanism. But we all have to. I think that we'll continue to learn, monitor our system, build it, you know, and use an adaptive approach as we go on. And we'll continue to rely on you. But we will forge ahead, especially when it comes to sustaining this policy and making it work. You know, sometimes when you speak with some people, they tend to create the impression that an IP system or patent registering a patent is a panacea to all your funding problems and all that. I realize that it's not necessarily like that. And I think you've made those points that it may not solve all your financial problems, but it can lift you, it can give you recognition, can do other things for you that indirectly would bring benefit. So we take that and we'll keep that in our hearts and we'll forge ahead. So on that note, if the facilitator would permit me, okay, on that note, I hand over to the facilitator.
Okay. I think we done for this session. The final item would have been a closing prayer, but I want to believe that we can't do 2 closing prayers in a day. So at this juncture, I would like to thank everyone for coming back after lunch. I could see a lot of people dozing, and it tells me that people had a very good lunch. So, yes, so at this point, I think I would like to thank everybody for coming back after lunch and wish you well. Thank you very much for coming. Please, can all the focal persons stay behind? We want to take a group photograph. Focal persons. As they get out, they'll give it. It's the same. It's the same thing. Focal persons. Rita. Thank you, thank you. Focal persons. 13 of us, right? So Prince, you do the photograph. Oh.
So where some seats are this?
It will be 2, yeah, that's true. In front and then. Okay. Are we ready?
Look at the list.
Please, can we get somebody?
If you have left it blank, then me, I will sit on it too.
Yes, 2-2. Smile, please. The very first IP committee of CSIR. We've come a long way. So please, we want you to come and sit in the middle. So when he's done. Let's do something.
Okay, thank you.